Hello everyone, thank you very much for coming. I know we've got a very full auditorium now for this session on India, Cultural Conundrum. My name is Alex von Tunzelmann, I'll be chairing the session. I'm very conscious that I am the British person here in a slightly imperialistic way chairing this discussion. I hope I can somehow get past that and that some of you will forgive me, not for all the things we did, but maybe for this discussion. I barely need to introduce this panel. People often say this panel needs no introduction. Normally that's an exaggeration. Today it actually isn't. But for anyone who doesn't know, we have Aitzaz Ahsan, who is a lawyer, a statesman, an intellectual, and an author. We have Shobhaa, who is clearly needing no introduction. And the author of 18 books and a cultural commentator. We have Rehman, former ambassador to the United Nations, a journalist and a politician. And we have Maseeh Rehman, a journalist based in Delhi, a reporter. So from the audience in this room, we can tell that there is a great deal of interest in India in this part of the world. Because I write about the British Empire, when I write about India, it often includes this place too. And one of the cultural conundrums of India, perhaps, is that we can approach this question from many angles, and perhaps the panel will have their own ideas too. We can talk about history. There are many conundrums in India. It is, in fact, the standard travel magazine cliche is that India is land of contrasts. And some of those contrasts and conundrums come in the form of religion, of communalism, of the history, of the differences of wealth, of economics, and you know, we could also talk about the contradictions within the arts, within the history of free speech. And of course, I'm sure here there will be some interest in looking at the upcoming elections in India and the future of this region and India's relationships with Pakistan. I would like to begin by asking each of our panelists just to give me something about their idea of India, their image of India. If I could start with Ahsan Saab.
Thank you, Alex. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that were this subject being discussed in Delhi as Pakistan's cultural conundrum, there would be much ire, much consternation and many protests in Pakistan. Why are they discussing us like this? But I'm glad we are discussing it, although I think Maseeh and Shobhaa are far more competent to speak about it. Next, I think, is Sherry, and I'm probably the least qualified to speak about India's cultural conundrum because I have not been able to understand Pakistan's cultural conundrum. But I think one aspect that stares me in the face when I think of India and its history and the history of South Asia, which we distort enormously in our textbooks here in Pakistan, is India has been for almost 800 years under minority governments. From virtually 1192 to 1947, first the Muslims, who remained a minority, ruled most parts of India, particularly the north and west of India, barring the south, and then the British, who were also a minority. So right up to 1947, India was a giant, a plural, multicultural, multi-religious giant with normally, and as a norm, with rulers and kings and emperors tolerant of diversity and plurality. Barring Firoz Shah, one of the Delhi kings, and Aurangzeb, none of the Delhi sultans or the Mughal emperors really oppressed the majority community of Hindus. Although they were denied top jobs, yet they could get into the highest, next to the highest job. Akbar's court was was a rainbow of talent from all communities. And India, despite this, as I said, the essential India remained plural. We don't teach this in our history books, that the Emperor Shah Alam II was blinded by a Muslim chieftain, Ghulam Qadir Rohila, who invaded Delhi with a small band of bandits, pinned down the emperor on the floor and gouged out his eyes with a dagger. This is the same Ghulam Qadir Rohila about an episode of during this period that Iqbal wrote his poem, Ghulam Qadir Rohila. He asked the princesses of royal blood to dance for him, sat on the throne, put his dagger aside and pretended to go to sleep, expecting one of the princesses would attack him and pick up the dagger and attack him. When they did not, Iqbal in his book, in his poem, Rohila kis kadar jafakash kina parvar tha nikali Shah Taimuri ki aankhein noke khanjar se. At the conclusion, Iqbal concludes when he says that the ladies continue to dance and did not try to avenge themselves. He says, Hamiyat naam tha jiska gayi Taimur ke ghar se. But the emperor was avenged by a confederacy of Hindu Maratha chieftains, the Scindia, Holkar, Peshwa, and the princesses were rescued from Ghulam Qadir Rohila also. When Siraj-ud-Dawla in 1757 faced the British, Robert Clive in the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and was betrayed by his Muslim general, it was an Indian Nawab, Diwan Ram Narayan, who wrote that famous poem that has moved the hearts of many about Siraj-ud-Dawla's brave and gallant defense of his homeland and then falling, which goes like this, which you, the elder generation must have heard. Ghazala tum to waqif ho, kaho Majnoo ke marne ki, Diwana mar gaya aakhir ko, veeranon pe kya guzri. Now there was a tendency, and this is the India that came through 1857 when both communities rose together to fight the British because of the cartridges of the Enfield rifles. Mangal Pandey was a great hero. This was in defense of an attempt to get a Muslim emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, restored. Mangal Pandey, Tatia Topi, Rani of Jhansi, a 20-year-old young woman leading her troops herself into the battlefield, Nana Sahab, and there were the Muslim heroes also, the Mahmudabad family, Hazrat Mahal, Begum Hazrat Mahal, etc. So there was a total, complete togetherness and a coexistence and cultural diversity in India. Unfortunately, as I said, we don't teach our students this history. This history is excised, particularly after the Ziyaist revisions of our history. We don't even now, in our textbooks, mention East Pakistan, because it doesn't sort of fit into the theory and the box that we put around our heads, the dark box we put around our heads, and then we think of everything. East Pakistan's breakaway does not fit into our history theories, and therefore we do not talk about it, we do not write about it. I think I've taken already a lot of time, I think. I think in conclusion I would say that we must remember and we must realize that we are South Asians. We are not Arabs. We are South Asian. We are Muslims, yes, by and large, and the majority in the Pakistanis, but we should try to create a plural society, a tolerant plural society. Unfortunately, we've made amendments in the constitution which bar a non-Muslim from becoming either the president or the prime minister of this country. But we have to tolerate plurality and imagine ourselves as South Asians. And I'll give you one last example of that. The Arabs don't have democracy, they don't have independent judiciaries, they don't have due process of law. They have their own states. We don't need necessarily to criticize them, but we must remember our distinctness. Fortunately, the people of Pakistan are committed to democratic social order. We have seen mass movements against military dictators, against Ayub Khan, against Yahya Khan, against Ziaul-Haq, the MRD movement, against Pervez Musharraf, the lawyers' mass movement, for rule of law, for democracy, for the right of vote. And these are all concepts that we share with the South Asian citizens of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and the other SAARC countries. And we must cherish and teach our children that tolerance and democracy are what are South Asian values, and we must embrace our South Asian identity. Thank you.
Well, gosh, there's a lot of history in that, and a lot of conundrums. Shobhaa, how do you see this question?
Well, to start with, I'm breathless after listening to this absolutely scintillating history of India. I least expected to hear it as spoken as evocatively as you did, sir. So thank you very much. I learnt a lot as an Indian myself. And there are two takeaways from what he said. The most important one being reclaiming the Southeast Asian identity for ourselves. Because unless we do that and we keep that focus always in front of us. And the second takeaway about the children, identifying with this identity more than any other identity. And as far as plurality is concerned, sir, your description of India was glorious. It was all in the past as far as I'm concerned. We are talking about the past, which was indeed glorious. I hope the future will be glorious. As of now, we have to face a few home truths. And even if I'm speaking as an indulgent aunt, which is what I feel towards my country, I feel passionately as an Indian, I feel protective, I feel optimistic, but also sometimes a little disheartened by what I see, the confusion that I see around me at this point. Yes, we have our paradoxes. Yes, there are centuries and centuries that coexist and live side by side. Yes, this can be maddening. It can be something that confuses even ourselves. And yes, to decode India, to deconstruct India, to understand India, to comprehend its complexities, I don't believe even one lifetime is enough. You just cannot get it. Because in even a city like Mumbai where I live with so many centuries literally within a 2-mile radius from my own home. And these somehow we have pulled along. And the reason why we have managed for so many years, and as you mentioned with minority rule, I don't think it has to do as much with tolerance as it does with philosophy and a very deep-rooted, deep-seated spiritual core. And I have to say, by spiritual core, I am completely dividing religion from it. It's a spiritual core that goes beyond a religious identity. It is having a faith in something that is much bigger than any of us. It is the faith that you have that regardless, we will survive. And also, what has kept us going is the fact that for all these many centuries that we've discussed earlier, and even in contemporary history and the history of the last few decades, India has never ever attacked another country for territorial gain. And I think that is something that keeps our people going. We have other challenges, many challenges, but we are not territorial in terms of looking for someone else's territory and claiming it as our own. That is perhaps a very politically incorrect thing to be saying today in Pakistan, but as an Indian I have to say it, because if I didn't believe it, then the rest of the country didn't believe it either. If that were to happen, there would be even more trouble than there already is. So I seek your indulgence for that comment, but I had to make it.
Okay, I know you're all absolutely champing at the bit to shout Kashmir at right now at Shobhaa Day. However, I did say I would let everyone speak first. We'll get on to some more questions later. Rehman, could I ask you to comment, please?
Certainly. Thank you very much. And after those two magisterial interventions, I'm just going to say a few things. One is that I'm uncomfortable with the word conundrum. That's simply because I've been an editor and I banned it a while ago. We banned withering and conundrum. Why? Because it doesn't really say anything. It's telling you to go into any layer of any complex reality. Now, and in India, as Ms. Day has said, and as Aitzaz Ahsan has superbly encapsulated, telescoped 600-700 years of history, is the ultimate onion to peel. So you can keep peeling its onion, and you still don't understand the heart of the Indian project. But to me, as a Pakistani who engages, my identity is unarguably Pakistani, and I think that is what informs how I think about India. I think that's the way we have all been brought up in terms of engaging with India and seeking at the heart of the Pakistani secular liberal project is to make peace with India. Now, I run an institute called the Jinnah Institute for the last 3 years, which runs the most uninterrupted track 2 dialogues between conflict and not with Indians. So we are placed in a position where we map the changes between the two countries, and I still am unhappy to say that we otherize each other in ways that are unnecessary, are unproductive, and don't lead us beyond what I see as strategic and civil society and policy stalemates. The India-Pakistan relationship is rooted in our own experiments with statecraft. Now, the Indians, clearly, it's the largest democracy in the world, tell their story very well. Because there's been, in my view, a Nehruvian consensus early in society. These are conventional wisdoms. I don't think anyone needs to deconstruct. But what hasn't happened in Pakistan is that consensus. And people often ask me why there is such a strong culture of dissent in the Pakistani media, as well as arts. I mean, our arts flourish even in very repressive times, just like love, okay? And we have now come to a place where I think it's a moment of profound democratic opportunity for the two nations to be talking to each other, not at each other, and moving past the otherization. Pakistan it is becoming what it is in and of itself. It's had its own leaders, its own traumas, its own navigations of multiple realities and a great deal of tragedy. I mean, East Pakistan in and of itself requires years of introspection, and there's an excellent book out there in the hall I saw. It's called The Blood Telegram, which I would urge everyone to read since this is a lit fest. And it talks about the realities of how Pakistan lost that country, but I think it wasn't just a war that made it lose it. It's the account of a consul general based in Dhaka, an American consul general, Archer Blood, who wrote a dissenting telegram to his State Department about how the country was changing, how it was defining itself in terms of selfhood and statehood, and Pakistan's ability to manage consent or create consensus, public consensus, has been its central paradox to my mind. And India, early in its years of statehood, because perhaps of Nehru, because the Congress party was such a big machine and the post-colonial experiment was what it was able to get past that. Now there is a worry that there is a swing to the right in India. There is encroachments on freedoms that were taken for granted, much more than in Pakistan. And there is now a narrative of resistance to the old secular project, which had its relationship with religion pretty sorted, the way I look at it. It was pretty sorted. The Constitution is what it is. It is a secular one, yet the public space has changed profoundly in the last 20 years in India. And I'm seeing it more as a swing of the pendulum than any grand narrative we impose on it of a country turning willy-nilly to the right. But we do have to look at beyond the daily, the micro-politics of day-to-day life, which allows many identities to be navigated in India. I mean, there are Muslims, there are so many cultures and so many flowers blooming there, but recently, I think those of us who watch the media and who watch India are seeing a kind of dissonance in the public space about, and I think it's a very healthy trend, the manufactured consent that Nehruvian politics created has given way to a younger generation questioning the new realities, and of course we question how there is no comparison between, say, how a Hindu or a minority navigates, or a Christian has to survive in a very, very intemperate and intolerant Pakistan. We all know about that, but I think there is also a question to be asked about, can Muslims now be what they used to be in the older India? Because India is changing in profound ways, and it allows a great deal of oxygen, and the public conversation is very open, like it is in Pakistan today. And people have to catch up with this. People have to catch up. Our Indian friends also have to catch up with the reality that you can engage with many Pakistans. And both the speakers spoke about identities, which is, I'm jealously guarding that for the next session, because that's something I proposed, that we talk about how to negotiate a South Asian identity. It cannot be anything but that, because the world has moved beyond borders. There really is a new normal in the developed world. Everybody is speaking and utilizing or leveraging their potential as regions. I mean, it's not just the EU. And so are we parochial still in our conceptions and our imaginations of each other? We go to India, there's very often talk about partition. Now, partition is something that happened. It was the bloodiest, most traumatic event, and it wasn't just an event. It went on. It was a process. For historians, for those of us, for our families who moved, and it continued its historical and cultural overhang for a long time, and it should, because it needs to be understood in terms of a division, not just of territory. But when people move, and when they do, what baggage they take with them. So I'm seeing the new generation in both India and Pakistan, and we are 1/5 of humanity as South Asia. So how are we imagining our futures? The youth cohort is one of the largest in the world between Pakistan and India, one of the largest, all under 35. And so they don't have the nostalgia that baby boomers were at least carrying with them. For instance, the Prime Minister of India still negotiates a bad strategic meeting and says, I want to go to my place of birth, which softens the entire conversation, I'm sure, diplomatically. as does, say, Nawaz Sharif wanting to exchange talk to Punjab. But I still think that we have moved past what I call the Benazir Bhutto Rajiv Gandhi moment, and I'm not doing this for partisan politics, but there was a different feeling then, and it's about the epical change in both our politics. And Indian politics now is in a place where it is really negotiating its place in the world. India is now moving past its status quo power. It's the status quo power in the region, as Ms. Day says, it doesn't want to conquer territory. Of course, that's very, very negotiable because Arguably, our readings of history are so deeply flawed, both in terms of how we look at ourselves and how we look at our neighbors. We are so busy as secular people being apologetic about what we have done and how we've constructed identities. The Archer Blood book really talks about how Pakistan messed up in what became Bangladesh, but its subtitle is about India's secret war in Bangladesh, in East Pakistan. Now, to someone of my generation, that's not something I have really factored in. I didn't realize how far the ingress was. Now, had Pakistan done that, we would still be hearing about it. We're, of course, still living down the Mumbai moment, and I think these are things that we have to factor into our public conversations, because until we have we bring some oxygen into it, there will be more heat in our public culture than light, and that really is the project between all of us. And I think I'm taking too much time, so I'm going to move on.
I sense everybody could probably talk about this for hours. Maseeh, please, can I bring you in? Your go.
Well, I had a problem not only with the word conundrum, but with a question mark also. Because, I would imagine that all cultures should remain a conundrum, that you shouldn't be able to easily understand a culture, and there would be contesting ideas and contesting traditions within any culture, which of course you see in India and you see in other parts of the world. But since this has become also a discussion on the Pakistani view of India, on India's conundrum and cultural conundrum. So I think I will try to take up some of the points that have come up here and maybe respond, since this is, I imagine, an overwhelmingly Pakistani audience. And many of those have to do with what Shairi Rehman just said. Yes, of course, as Aitzaz Sahab detailed the historical tradition, the pluralistic tradition in the subcontinent. That is very true. In South Asia, maybe India is one country where that tradition survives more than in other places. And I think a lot of South Asians recognize that. I remember I went to Hajj in February 2002 for Time magazine to figure out what the Muslim world was thinking of America. And I happened to meet a chemistry professor from Kabul who was also doing the Hajj. And I remember, the Taliban had just been ousted from Kabul. And I was asking him how he sees the immediate future now. And he was almost emotional to the point of tears. And he said that, our hope now is that we learn from India and basically learn how to live in a pluralistic society where no matter what your ethnicity, no matter which part of the country you belong to, you can come together in a common project in terms of building the nation and building society. So I think that continues in India today. But as Shairi rightly expressed anxiety over the recent political, well, it's not recent, as she said, the last 20 years. What has happened in India now is there is definitely the middle ground in public life, especially in politics, has shifted right. And this began, of course, around 20 years ago, and the shift right was, of course, in terms of economic policies. But unfortunately, in this part of the world, a political shift to the right also involves the rise of religious sectarianism. And that is also what has happened in India today. So you have a situation where the discourse now is often determined by religious, sectarian leaders from the right. And that is a process we still don't know how this is going to turn out. Frankly, nobody knows what the results of the next election is going to be, but it does look like the BJP is the front runner. So we have to wait and see what happens, but most likely we will see the BJP come to power. Yet, despite all this, Sherry also expressed anxiety about Muslims in India, whether they will be able to live in the way they have been doing for the past 60 odd years. And there I think, though obviously there have been pressures, there have been some sensational events which have made it appear like Muslims are totally besieged in India, but that is simply not true. Muslims still occupy the space which they had. In fact, the position of Muslims, the Muslim elite, is much better than it ever was. And it has been for a while. I remember, during the software boom, when I used to tell Pakistani friends, when the India-Pakistan discussion came up, that, listen, we have a Muslim businessman in India who has made his wealth in only recent years. Though he had a family business, which was a small business of making soap and selling oils, but he was now in software, Azim Premji of Wipro company. And at the height of the software boom, he was ranked, I think, number 3 in the world, and was worth about $40 billion. And the entire Pakistan national foreign debt at that time was $40 billion. So I used to tell my Pakistani friends that you have a situation where you have one Muslim businessman who is in a position, Indian Muslim businessman who is in a position to pay off the entire national debt of Pakistan. That process continues. But of course, Muslims are also under pressure because of the rise of the Hindu right. Still, at the same time, you have had economic development. So that has also had a trickle effect, though the trickle-down effect is a controversial issue in India. But there has been some element, large sections of people have joined the middle class, whether it's the lower middle class or the middle class, and Muslims have also benefited from that. And Muslims have also emerged in various regions in positions of leadership in terms of whether it's the economy, sports, you have seen. Now, since we all love cricket, let me give you a small example. There was a time in India where it was clear that only one Muslim player could play for the national 11. And I happen to be related to the old off-spinner Ghulam Ahmad. And he was one of the selectors. And I remember how upset he was when, I won't take names here, but he proposed another Muslim player when there already was a Muslim player on the side. And another selector said, he was the chairman of the selectors, another selector said, Saab, kyun ek already hai na? So from that we have a situation now where it's not really an issue whether you are, what your religion is. It more has to do with your ability as a sportsman and whether you fit into that 11 at that moment of time. So you've had 3-4 Muslims playing for India at one time. So the position of Muslims is they're facing challenges in India, but the old idea of India is still very strong, and therefore, and then quite simply, Muslims are such a large minority that there is no way you can treat such a large minority in a random, callous manner. I mean, even leaders on the Hindu right. And we saw this during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's, the last time when BJP was in power. And he recognized there was an outcry in India from Muslim intellectuals when he said it, but I support him, I support that idea that came out of the Prime Minister's office, which is that the Hindu-Muslim question in India is linked to the India-Pakistan question. I mean, if the India-Pakistan question gets resolved, I mean, here obviously we're referring to Kashmir and certain other problems that we have, the Hindu-Muslim question within India also will acquire a different dimension. So since K-word came up, the last thing I want to mention is, Shobhaa is half right. We may have coveted territory in the past, but I'm quite convinced that today we don't. Because the whole concept of not just India, but the whole idea of South Asia has changed. And this started very clearly with Vajpayee, very clearly enunciated. After all, you had a Hindu right-wing Prime Minister of India going to the Minar-e-Pakistan and visiting the Minar-e-Pakistan. But definitely on the Kashmir issue, the very clear consensus in India is, no matter what any politician or military leader might say, that we have to accept the status quo. I know it's a very difficult thing for Pakistanis to accept, since the question comes up that, for so many decades we have struggled and given sacrifices, but India does not covet any territory anywhere in South Asia. India is focused on economic development, and maybe we are going to come to that. We are struggling with the whole question of economic development, and that is the obsessive concern today in India.
Wow, okay, well, those introductory statements went on for a pretty long time. So I'm crossing out my questions quite fast, because also I know that there are people in the audience that are going to be itching to respond to this and get in yourselves, and I want to give you guys enough time. What I am going to do, if I can absolutely beg you, one-sentence answers. Can I ask each of you one question just coming out of what you've just said? One sentence.
May I respond?
Uh-oh. I'm not going to be able to control these four.
I get the feeling that this session should have ideally been named not a cultural conundrum with a question mark, but a political conundrum with an exclamation mark. Yeah. Because that's what it seems to have developed into, and it's inevitable. In response to what we just heard, it seems a little depressing to me that each time we are sort of compelled to trot out our report card and say, oh, come on, guys, we've had Muslim presidents, we've had Muslim movie stars dominating Bollywood, we've had Muslim cricketers as captains, we've had Muslims. Of course we do, and we should take that for granted. It shouldn't be something that we need to underline as something that we are doing that is exceptional. Because the Muslims and the Hindus, we are part of the same